Anybody, anywhere,
It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen.
This pass caught by Paulsen, the tight end.
And from 106.7 The Fan, Grant Paulsen.
Welcome in to Take Command with Logan Paulsen, who spent a decade in the NFL. I'm Grant Paulsen. You can watch us on the 106.7 The Fan and Team 980 YouTube channels, of course. You can listen to this podcast wherever you get your audio. Subscribe, rate, review, do all of that podcasty stuff. Logan, you are at the Shrine Bowl this week. We'll be talking about that coming up on the podcast. But you've been traveling around, man. You've been logging the miles.
Logging the miles. I was out in California doing some combine prep with my agent last week, so that was always fun. It's always fun to meet the new class of guys, like guys that you've been watching a little bit on film and then see them in live and living color and then get to talk to them and kind of see their process. And it really, to me, it's like a microcosm of like what you would get at the combine when I get to do that, because it's like, oh, here's my preconceived notion of this player from film. And then you get the guy on the board and you're like, dude, this guy's a ball player. This guy loves eat, breathe, sleep football, and the types of questions that they ask and their involvement. Like I had a guy who met with him all day. He's like, hey man, I'm going to grab dinner. Can we meet back at the hotel? And I probably watched, no kidding, 6 hours of film with this kid. And he just had questions and like, things about fronts. And I was just like, man, this dude is a football playing Jesse. And again, like he is now subsequently moved up my rankings because I know that about him, but it's so interesting how that kind of soft stuff, like, not the height, weight, speed, but the how you love ball impacts the process so much.
And to be clear, so your agent is representing these players in the draft, and then he still buddies with you, representing you throughout your career, brings you in to work with these guys. And is that on more film stuff or on the field stuff or what?
So like with tight ends, yeah, there's going to be a lot of like inline blocking stuff because the tight ends don't block as much anymore. So like, we work on stance, start, position angles to the next level, all those types of things. And then obviously there's a film element, and the film is the big part because it's like where the majority of the learning happens. And I will say, I don't know if it's the NIL stuff or the kids transferring, but there are some guys that come into these meetings and they know absolutely nothing. It's like incredible. Like, it's like, who was coaching you? Like, how did you get through college? Like, just people just were like, winging a prayer, and they're just good enough athletes and they're good enough adapters. They figure it out. So sometimes that film session time is worth gold because they're going to the Shrine Bowl. They're going to the Senior Bowl. They're going to have interviews with teams. They're going to be learning a new offense that's not, red, blue, like these one-word calls. And so giving them some background in that stuff can be extremely helpful. And also, heading into the combine.
I want to do a deeper dive on some of this a little later in the pod, but let's get to some of the Commanders coaching news that's come out over the last couple of days. We'll start on the offensive side of the ball as David Blau, your new coordinator, is starting to put together a staff, including on the offensive line, where Washington did something a little bit surprising to me. They obviously really like Darnell Stapleton. He was the assistant O-line coach to Bobby Johnson the last couple of years in Washington. He had been here 24 and 25. He's now been promoted to the offensive line coach. He was the O-line coach with the Florida Gators in 22 and 23 in college. He was the assistant O-line coach with the Louisiana Raging Cajuns before that. I think he started his O-line coaching career at Bucknell and Sam Houston at the lower levels, but he played in the league for the Steelers for a very short time and then bounced around in some spring leagues. But Darnell Stapleton, who is 40 years old, is going to be the new O-line coach. On one of the recent pods we did, Logan, you talked about how important this hire was going to be because they're going to coordinate your run game largely, and they're also going to help with protections. What do you make of staying in-house here and promoting from within?
Well, I think Darnell Stapleton has a really strong reputation, at least around the league, as an assistant offensive line coach. He's a guy that has got a reputation for being able to develop talent. And, I like to watch the offensive line in practice, again, in training camp and during OTAs. And I do think he has a good relationship with the guys. Like when he's standing back there talking, like guys aren't, messing around. They're listening. They're locked in. They're receptive to what he says. Like when I'm on the sideline, he's got the iPad and he's talking to guys. And it's like they're not like, oh my gosh, this guy's talking to me. It's like he does have a strong voice in the room. And so I do think young offensive coordinator, obviously, in David Blau, I think this guy was kind of poised for this ascension. So this doesn't strike me as too surprising. Stapleton I'm talking about now. So again, it's maybe a little bit surprising because it's like who is going to be in charge of coordinating the run game, and that's a different conversation maybe for a later time. It's like, we talked about in systems I've been a part of, the offensive line kind of coordinates the protection, they coordinate the run game. But there are teams that, like when I was in San Francisco, for example, like Mike McDaniel was the run game coordinator. So he would kind of work with Benton at the time in terms of collaborating to make the run game. So maybe you feel like Anthony Lynn and Stapleton, who's got this great relationship with the players, now can get some mentorship from Anthony Lynn in terms of how to cultivate and develop a run game.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. The O-line coach and the run game coordinator, which are often the same,
Usually,
honestly, like a lot of times.
But I guess what I'm saying is there are times where they can be different people. That's not.
Yeah,
totally
and that's the case here. To your point, I mean, Lynn was the run game coordinator, and frankly, I've heard that there were a couple times where he and Bobby Johnson maybe would butt heads or not see things eye to eye. So you have to have a good relationship with that O-line coach, and hopefully he and Stapleton will moving forward. If Lynn is here, I guess we don't know for sure how they're going to round out the rest of the staff. Anthony Lynn's son just got a defensive coordinator job at Penn State. He's obviously well respected and has connections all over the league. So we'll have to see if he's the veteran that hangs around here. Does Brian Johnson, who has been an OC and has called plays, does he hang around? We have not heard the rest of the staff just yet. Another guy to get some thoughts on, I don't know if you are familiar personally with Shane Taub, but his dad is the longtime special teams coach with Kansas City, with the Chiefs. He became the assistant O-line coach. He's been offensive quality control. So this is kind of the normal trajectory here, Logan, where a couple years quality control. If you could give us some insight maybe on what that role is and what that means. I've always kind of joked you're labeling videotapes and just doing some grunt work, but like it's a lot of stuff. It's a busy job. And now you get your chance as an assistant to a position coach, which is like the first step into kind of climbing the ladder.
Yeah, I know a lot of people kind of poo-poo that, quality control coach, but that's where Sean McVay started. That's where Kyle Shanahan started. That's where Mike McDaniel started. And the reason that a lot of teams do that is because it is a terrible job. So like, as a coach, like I was looking into getting into coaching, and that's the path you have to go. Is you're like you're saying, you're labeling all the clips, you're diagnosing defenses, you're essentially breaking down film, you're drawing cards, you're making sure the playbook's locked in. So talk about learning a ton of football through a fire hose. It is basically like forcing you to learn as much football as humanly possible. Like that's what the job is. And so I will say with Shane specifically, like he was also, in addition to being a quality control, was like the third offensive line assistant. So he's been working with that group quite a bit. Like you'll see him in pregame warmup, holding the pad, walking guys through drills. And he does have a strong voice. Like one of the things I remember talking to a former head coach, and I was like, what are you looking for with that offensive line coach? It's like they've got to have a little bit of grit to them because like that group has to be gritty. And when I see Shane kind of talking and working, he's got kind of a deep voice, got a commanding voice, and the guys seem to listen to him, right? And again, like that's what I'm talking about. Like both these guys, Stapleton and Taub, have good relationships already with the offensive line. They kind of know what the guys need in terms of technical development. So I kind of like that they're familiar. Now they are stepping into larger roles, and again, that can be challenging anytime you're moving someone to a new position. But I do think Stapleton at least kind of had the reputation of being ready for that position, and Shane, at least in the building, like seems to be buttoned up. Like there's a couple ways that I grade GAs. Like if you come down to get food in the cafeteria and you've got a ton of papers and it's falling all over the place, and you're kind of running and drawing cards as you're walking to get food, which I've been around GAs that do that. Like Shane's pretty buttoned up, man. It's in the folder. He's locked in. He's walking to his space. Like he seems like he's pretty buttoned up. And again, watching him in practice, like there's something to that too. Like he knows the flows and rhythms of practice. Like he knows the drills. He knows the technical positions of the offensive line. So again, like I kind of like the familiarity here. It just depends now on like, do you trust those guys who I'm sure are smart guys with that added element of game planning, X's and O's, putting that group in the best position to be successful? Or do you, whether or not Anthony Lynn stays, kind of say, hey, this is going to be our run game coordinator, whether it's Lynn or somebody else, that kind of fosters their growth from a technical X's and O's standpoint.
Yeah, and you've seen a couple of guys hired, we'll get into DJ Williams in a minute, who have fathers who have been in the league and around the league for a long time in varying capacities. And Dave's one of those guys, right? Or Shane, rather, is one of those guys. I mean, his dad is a 22-year special teams coach. So like when you're talking about bloodlines and being around it, I actually think that can be greatly beneficial. I know there's always this idea of nepotism and all this stuff. And that's, I remember talking to Joe Buck once and he's like, yeah, nepotism can be a great thing if you're good. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's only a bad thing if you're not. So you got to wait and see who's good and who isn't. Before we get to DJ Williams, well, let's start with DJ Williams, then I'll circle back to a bigger picture question. So DJ Williams comes in to be the quarterback's coach. This is a pretty big hiring here, right? Because you've got Blau leaving the quarterback's room. This is the guy that's going to work most directly, spend the most hours with Jaden Daniels. DJ Williams, the son of Doug Williams, legend here in Washington, who's now been in the front office in 3 different regimes over the last decade or so since coming back to DC. His son DJ was an assistant with the Saints, then became the assistant quarterbacks coach in Atlanta in 24, the quarterbacks coach there in 25. So this will be just his second year as a QB's coach. I talked to Kirk Cousins about him very briefly, and Kirk had very nice things to say about the person, the worker, the smarts, all that stuff. Thinks he's a really ascending, sharp guy. So that was cool to hear. Cousins has been working with him in Atlanta. But, this is a huge hire for them, obviously, when you're talking about entrusting Jaden Daniels to somebody. But also, if you're Blau, I think quarterbacks coach is arguably the biggest thing you do because you're kind of layering that talent below your coordinator who could leave soon if everything goes well.
Yeah, and again, quarterback coach is to me kind of a funny position in terms of like utilization and scheme. So, for example, when I was here in Washington and Kyle was the OC and Matt LaFleur was the quarterback coach, there was no separation of the two of them. Like Kyle would go directly from team meeting into the quarterback meeting. And so it'd be Kyle and Mike, Mike in that meeting together. Matt LaFleur, sorry. Mike's his brother, but Matt LaFleur, right? And so, like, I think in this situation, like, it depends on, how much voice you want Williams to have, right? DJ, like, in terms of his communication, direct line of communication with Jaden. I'm sure they trust him. Again, I love the fact that he was with Sean Payton. Like, talk about a guy who, like, there's certain sprouts here that I think are really important. And like the Sean Payton connection in New Orleans is huge. The fact that he worked with Kirk Cousins, like having played with Kirk, knowing the type of professional that he is, like he knows what good professionalism looks like. He knows what good offense looks like. So I like that I think this is a good person to bring into the building. Now it just depends on how much voice he has and what kind of relationship he's able to develop with Jaden Daniels. But I do think when you look at like his tree and where he's been, like, I think this is a good hire. I think, again, it's the room, the building, the offense specifically feels a little young, but sometimes that can be good because, like, again, I think back to when I was here in 10, 11, 12, 13, obviously with, that tree that now is so lauded. Sean was a quality control. Kyle was a first-time OC or, like, first full-time OC. Mike was a quality control who was, like, an assistant wide receivers coach. Like, that passion, that motivation is super helpful, and that youth it can be super helpful because it's kind of the creation and innovation of ideas. Now it just depends on how, again, a first-time play caller and Blau is able to kind of take this youth motivation energy and direct it in the right way. To
that point, I mean, maybe they keep Lynn or Brian Johnson or both, and then the staff is more veteran because you've got two guys that have called plays, OCs. You've also got a guy in Lynn on your staff who's been a head coach, which would be pretty helpful, obviously. But we don't know that. So I guess you talked about maybe being a little surprised with how young everybody is. I mean, do they need to at some point bring in, a guy who's got some white in the beard, who's got some pelts on the wall, or can they do this with all this youth? Like, I'll speak for myself. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm just surprised with a first-time coordinator if they don't, especially because Dan Quinn, if your head coach was an offensive guy, then fine, whatever. But he's a defensive guy and theoretically could be spending more time on defense. Now you can make the case because they're bringing in, it looks like, a long-time coordinator who's called plays for a long time based on all the guys they're interviewing. Maybe he'll feel like I don't have to do that as much and I could help more on offense. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if you need to. Like, I just think about, like, what I would want if I was a first-time guy. And so, like, I think it's nice to have a veteran member of the staff who's done it before, who I could go and be like, hey, man, like, how do we sequence installs? Like, how do we manage work rest days in terms of practice developing a script, like just somebody that if I had a question, I could bounce ideas off. And I guess that person, obviously like the conventional way of thinking is that person's in the building, they're on the staff, but also like some of like my coaching buddies have done like years where they've consulted. Like one of the tight end coaches that I played for in Atlanta did 2 years just remotely consulting for Miami. And so like Mike would call him and be like, hey man, we're having an issue with X. Like, can you take a look at it? So he would kind of do like an advanced self-scout, look at it, get him some data, kind of run some play ideas by him. And then Mike would take it or leave it. But I think just having that kind of sounding board, everyone thinks, oh, it's got to be on the staff. It's got to be in the building. It's got to be, that like you can find somebody outside the building who's very talented who could maybe fill that role. So that's one where I'd maybe look at that. And again, like I'm just thinking about what I would want. Maybe Blau is like, dude, I've been keeping these books for 12 years. They're all uploaded in the computer. I've already selected out the plays I want. I don't want. I think this fits our person. Maybe he's way on top of it. I just think about what I personally would want if I was taking this role for the first time.
Take command, Logan Paulsen and Grant Paulsen. We'll get to the defensive side of the ball. The DC interviews continue. Who might Washington land on? We'll get to that next on Take Command. Welcome back. Take command, Logan Paulsen and Grant Paulsen. Watch us 106.7, the Fan, Team 980 YouTube channels, and of course, subscribe, rate, review, listen to this podcast wherever you get your audio. Hey, before we get into the DC search, just within the last 24 hours as we record, and early this week as people listen to this, Indiana goes from worst to first. I mean, arguably as bad a program as there's been in college football forever, to national championship winning team under Curt Cignetti, who's one of the great college coach performers now ever over the last couple of years, going from JMU, taking them to the big boy level, and then to Indiana. But I wanted to bring this up because of Fernando Mendoza. I find him so fascinating. He is like such a righteous, goody two-shoe, like Eddie Beaver Cleaver.
A little bit of a nerd. Yeah, a little bit of a nerd.
Oh, it's a huge nerd, huge dork, but he's like the coolest nerd dork ever when he's like diving for touchdowns and making throws. Their offense is wild to me, though. It's like handoffs and back shoulder throws. Like that's basically what they do, like all the RPOs. But I guess my question is really quickly on him. At the beginning, I just said, this guy can't go 1-1. It's not a thing. Before I'd seen him play a lot because I was like, this guy's just a nerdy, goofy college quarterback. The more I watch him, though, everything's accurate, decisive. He's athletic. He's going to go first overall to the Raiders. What do you make of him? I don't remember a player like him at all in terms of like makeup, personality. Then you get him on the field and he's like a stone cold killer. Like he's just a wild ride, man.
He's a wild ride. The soft comparison is like Kirk Cousins in terms of personality, a guy that's a little bit more buttoned up, but seems to find ways to relate to the team and the people around him. And again, I think Mendoza's a little bit even a notch up from Kirk, who he finds ways to kind of.
He's like himself. The big league version to Kirk's AA.
Yeah, right. But. This is what I will say, man, is I've played with some odd ducks, right? Like in my career, just guys that you're like, this dude is a weirdo. Like whether they're like emotionally unregulated or whether they're like football nerdy. But if you can play football, like no one cares, right? Like no one cares. So if you come out, if you're Fernando Mendoza and you come to Las Vegas and you're doing what you did at Indiana in terms of just being super accurate, hyper competitive, tough, like, you know what I mean? Like people support that. Right, people get behind that, and that's the great thing about NFL locker room is that you get all these people from all these different walks of life. You get Max Crosby in Las Vegas, who is this great leader of men, but has his own kind of troubled journey to get to this point in the same locker room as Fernando Mendoza, and you can make that happen. You can make that work. Like I think about my time like in Atlanta, where all these guys are from Georgia and Texas and Mississippi and the Deep South, and I'm here from like LA. And it's just a different vibe. The music's different. But, like, that's the great thing about a team, man, is, like, I get to learn about them. They get to learn about me. And if we all take care of business, everyone's going to be happy. So I think that's the cool thing about seeing him be so successful, right? It's like he found a way to make it work.
It's crazy. How do you evaluate, or how should teams evaluate? I just think it's hard with quarterbacks and offenses like that. Like it seems really simple watching it. I joke about all the back shoulders, but I mean, they lead the league in them and it's a lot of RPOs. I saw one of the quarterback coaches on Twitter yesterday, who coaches a lot of guys before the draft, was like, it's going to be hard because of this offense. And I'm like, but isn't that with everybody? Like when you watch Jaden's offense, it was a lot of throws outside the numbers. And, you could say that about a lot of non-pro style offenses. And you just have to do your best to figure out how is it going to translate.
I will say, I was kind of like you. I hadn't watched a ton of Indiana, and I'm not watching a lot of quarterbacks now because the Washington Commanders don't really need one, obviously.
It's nice to not have to do that.
Yeah, but I am watching these games, and I was thinking, I literally had this thought last night and probably 2 weeks ago when I watched them play against Ohio State. And I was like, this offense, I'm surprised more people aren't talking about it because it's not a one-to-one transfer in terms of NFL concepts. Like there's not a lot of throws over the middle of the field. He doesn't throw a ton. His throw, the accuracy is awesome, but on these very specific types of throws, his pocket management's a little bit funny. You don't see it a lot because they run the ball so much. So I'm a little surprised that none of that's come up in the dialogue about him. And I think part of it is because he's like a unique personality. So that takes the headline. But I think about him compared to Jaden or him compared to Drake May. Drake May, there was much more pro style and people were picking him apart. I was one of them because his footwork was a little bit off. He'd missed throws. He was inaccurate. But you saw more NFL throws in that offense than you'll see probably for 2 years of Mendoza at Indiana. Even with Jaden, again, the throw volume there was so different. But he has throws over the middle of the field. He has anticipation digs. He has these great post throws. And so maybe the number was smaller, but those throws were there. Here it's we're throwing free access hitches. We're throwing fades on conversion routes. I don't see any throws over the middle of the field, and no one has brought that up. So to me, I'm like, I want to get in the room with him. I want to talk to him. I want to see what that looks like. But that to me, that is a huge red flag. And again, everyone's just like, cool, he's awesome. He's the best. And maybe it's because there's no other quarterback in this class. Even watching Cam Ward, there's a little bit of there's stuff over the middle of the field. It's him creative outside of. That's not what this player is. So it is just very different. I'm really surprised that no one's brought that up in conversation.
Yeah. So that's how I feel watching it. Now I will say, and I have to admit, I've studied him zero. It's literally while I'm eating pretzels, watching their games occasionally. You know what I'm saying? Which is very different. But I'm fascinated by him. I just think the whole thing is hilarious, and his entire makeup. And watching him talk about ball, there's this McVay element too that I think teams are also, or at least the media is fixated on.
He reminds me a little bit of Andrew Luck. And I know that's a lofty comparison, but his demeanor, the way he talks about football, his size, his throwing motion, it reminds me of Luck a lot. Now, Luck's offense at Stanford, you could not have been more pro style than that. And his ability to manage and get in the checks and all that was a totally different animal. But there is some of that to him, which I think is probably very enticing to teams.
Isn't it nice to not have to worry about watching quarterbacks anymore?
People are someone would ask me, what about that kid from LSU, Nassib, or whatever his name is? What's his name? It's anyway,
Nussmeier, Garrett Nussmeier.
Yeah, Garrett Nussmeier. And I was like, I haven't watched any of it. I don't care about that. I'm worried about edge rushers. I'm watching tight ends. I'm looking at receivers. I'm looking at third down backs. Get out of here. I'll let you know when we.
Not my problem anymore. Yeah. All right, let's talk about speaking of needs, the defensive side of the ball, because there might not be a position you shouldn't be watching on that side of the ball. But who's going to coordinate this defense? If you look at the interviews so far, here's the list I've got. Patrick Graham, Raiders defensive coordinator. Joe Cullen, Chiefs defensive line coach, former Jaguars DC. Denard Wilson, Titans defensive coordinator with local ties, went to school in the area here. Carl Scott, Seahawks DBs and passing game coordinator. He has never been a DC, never called plays before, which is interesting. But by the way, anything involved with Mike McDonald in Seattle, color me intrigued at this point. Jonathan Gannon, former Cardinals head coach, and of course had the number one defense in Philly as a coordinator at one point in the division. He's also interviewing with the Cowboys now. And then Brian Flores did interview with the boys. Vikings defensive coordinator, top candidate because of, just the style of play and the fact that he's been a head coach before. That's our dream. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we've talked about this a lot on the show. We both have said, you don't really see them landing the plane, but it would be amazing. So here's where I want to start. Before we even get into Flores, what does that list tell you, if anything? When you hear that group, Graham, Cullen, Wilson, Scott, Gannon, Flores, knowing that if Raheem doesn't get a head coaching job, they also want to talk to him. Like, what does the list they're putting together tell you?
So a couple things. One, I think it shows like stuff we've talked about in this show, which is they're looking for experienced guys. The other thing that I love about this list is, you mentioned it, they're good defenses or good defensive principles. And one thing that I heard, which I thought was really interesting, this was a couple of years ago, and maybe we've talked about this offline at some point, but like sometimes you interview people because you like what they're doing on defense. So I like that you're interviewing, Carl Scott or whatever, because I think like getting him in, like, how do we coach the match? Like, what's going on? Like, how would you maximize this? Like, or getting Brian Flores in there, like, how do you rule this out?
Just
like,
picking his brain.
And I think just talking ball, like, because everyone runs zero. Everyone runs quarters match. No one runs it like Seattle, and no one runs zero like Brian Flores. So what are the details that make that thing come to life? Because, again, like, this is the funny thing about the NFL. Like, I do all these film breakdown shows, and the number one comment in every film breakdown show is, don't give away the secrets. Like, everyone's going to see this. They're going to know what we're thinking. First off, like, everyone has the film. They're watching it anyway. That's besides the point. But the thing that makes an offense or defense really electric is the coaching detail. And so if I can get those guys in the building and we can have these conversations, like, I think that's something that is encouraging to me, because you're kind of pulling the right threads here in terms of finding people to talk to. Now, in terms of the theme, it's experience, it's guys that have done it before, and I think that's the right way to be thinking about it.
So I tweeted something to the effect of, Brian Flores is my top choice. I don't see him coming here because I don't necessarily think you have a great case to land him when he's getting head coaching interviews and there's 10 other DC jobs, probably with some better landing spots. Of course, you get Twitter's not a real place and everybody's a jerk. So I get everyone telling me I'm a hater, but then you got people that call me a homer all the time. So it's like, well, let's pick one. Am I a homer or a hater? Can we decide on that, please? And let me know what I'm supposed to do moving forward. Thanks. But regardless, on Flores, I don't see it happening because I don't think that they have enough to offer. I feel like I am a 4 and he is a 10, like, I'm trying to outkick my coverage in the largest way possible. So I'll put my best foot forward. I'll show up with flowers. I'll wine and dine you. I'm taking you to the best steakhouse. I'm opening the door for you. But what would be the case that you would make if you're them to say, we are your Huckleberry? Like, this is where you should be. I got Daron Payne, maybe, at $28 million a year. And what? Like, what are you selling?
You know what I would sell him? I'd be like, hey, man, come on and sit down. Here, first off, here's this fat check. But second off, we've got Jaden Daniels. And I think, like, every coach, no matter who they are, they want to get to the dance. They want to get to the dance. Everybody, every player you talk to, I was not this way when I got in the league, but I'll be damned if 5 years in, like, I was like, I want to get to the Super Bowl. It's so funny. Like, I advised some of my clients that I trained, some of these kids in the draft, like, oh, what team should I go? I'm like, if you have an opportunity to go to the Super Bowl, like, let's pull that thread and see if we can get there. And so with Jaden Daniels, I think that's a possibility every year, after what we saw in 2024. So I'd say, hey, man, you want to go to the Super Bowl? You want to be a Super Bowl winning defensive coordinator? You can do that here with this group. And we think that your scheme can elevate this defensive personnel the same way it did in Minnesota. We have enough kind of interchangeable pieces here. I think Dorrance Armstrong is a really enticing piece in terms of that kind of stand-up rush end that can drop a little bit, can do some of that looping stuff. You need 2 blitzing linebackers that can run a cross dog stunt on a center. We've got, if you want to retain Bobby Wagner, but Frankie Louvu has got to be one of the best blitzing linebackers in the NFL. Think about what that's going to do for your scheme. We've got Mikey Sanderstill, who talk about Palms coverage. You want to do that? He plays with maybe the best vision on the quarterback of anybody in the division, right? So, like, there are pieces here that should get you excited about bringing what you do here. And if you do what you do and Jaden does what he does, we'll be raising that thing at the end of the year. And so that would be my pitch. In addition to a big check, is like, you want to win a Super Bowl? We can get that done for you here.
If the check's big enough, that might be the most important part. The other thing, too, that I would add to that is they got a lot of money, and they got the number 7 overall pick. So I'm not going to be able to get you a ton in the draft right now, number of picks.
But I'll get you number 7, though. But
I'll give you number 7, and you're going to help me make the decision on who you want. You want Sonny Styles at linebacker. We'll move back a couple spots. You want a speed rusher.
David Bailey,
David Bailey, yeah. What are you looking for? And so you can kind of, I don't know if you want to promise them the pick, but you can tell them we got the number 7 pick and we're hoping to use it on defense. And then also, I mean, they're rolling over the second most money from last year in the league. They have top 5 money to spend this offseason. If you really wanted to, you could do the New England thing from a year ago where you go get Milton Williams and you go get, Robert Spillane and you go get, you load up on Carlton Davis in the secondary. Like, they spent a ton of money. Everyone talks about Drake May, and understandably, like MVP caliber season. But they also went out and they really addressed a lot of needs and threw money at good players and spent a lot of cash. Like, if Washington wants to get aggressive and go get some guys on big contracts, they could do that this offseason. And I would remind Flores of that too.
No, I think that's a great point. And again, like, his scheme is somewhat personnel agnostic, but you need certain pieces to make that thing work. And so if I can kind of promise that we can make this thing look significantly better in 2026 than it did in 2025, I mean, if I'm Flores, man, I'm very confident in my scheme. Again, I want to win a Super Bowl. Now, I'm kind of aligned with you in terms of thinking that there's better. Like, he might get the Pittsburgh job, and I can't think of a more enticing job in Pittsburgh because they don't fire coaches. Like, you're going to be there for 10 years. So, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's a pretty good spot. But so, again,
not to completely sidetrack, I was thinking about this a lot yesterday. Flores would make a ton of sense there. You know what I was thinking too, though, is I think Chris Shula from the Rams and Jesse Minter from the Chargers make so much sense for the Steelers because they're like super young defensive guys. But regardless, they often go defense. It's not just the Steelers for him, too. He's interviewing for a few jobs. So he's got to figure out first, I'm not getting a head coaching job. And then there's double-digit DC jobs that you're looking at, and everyone's going to want you. I think he's interviewed, I know, with Dallas and a couple other spots, including to Washington. Let me ask you this real quick. So Flores would still be your number 1 choice, I'm assuming?
Yeah.
Okay,
he would.
Mine too. If that doesn't happen, like what I would say in more of the realistic tier of like guys that right now are doing interviews and going to be a DC somewhere. I know Jonathan Gannon still got some head coaching possibility, but who would be your realistic, like non-Flores choice of the bunch? Gannon, Scott, Wilson, Cullen, Graham.
I mean, I think I'm still probably holding out for the guys coming out of Atlanta. Of the guys you mentioned, Gannon's pretty high on the list. I don't hate Graham. Wilson is interesting as a young guy who I think did a good job in Tennessee. Obviously, we've talked about those guys before, but I like Raheem. I again, maybe because I know him, I've worked with him. Like, I think the world of him as a football mind, right? And Jeff Ulbrich, like, I think the proof is in the pudding with him, man. He's worked with some really bright dudes in the Jets. I think what he did with Atlanta in terms of turning that defense around and then getting those guys to play hard and downhill and fast and aggressive, like, that speaks for itself. Like, the resume's in the tape. And so, like, to me, those guys, because, again, they know Dan, they kind of know his approach, they know his philosophy, are really, really high on my list. And, again, I think they're probably going to wait until they make some type of declaration with Ulbrich before they make the hire here. That's just I have no inside baseball on that. That's just kind of what I would do because, again, like, seeing how they work together in Atlanta, seeing how Jeff has grown as a coach, like, that just seems like a really good fit. And obviously, I just mentioned how excited I would be if Raheem was here. But of the guys you mentioned, I think Gannon's got to be pretty high in terms of opportunity.
I'd be thrilled with Ulbrich. I'd be pumped with Raheem. Real quick, because of your experience with Raheem Morris, I want you to kind of answer this because I get pushback when I mention him and it is fair. Like, his defensive numbers are not quite the same as some of these other guys like Ulbrich or even Gannon at his peak. Flores for sure. Graham has had some really good years. So with Raheem, he's one of these guys that's always been beloved and super popular. And the results have not always been there as a head coach, clearly, but also as a DC to an extent, although he had a really, really good year with the Rams with great personnel. Now, I've been around him when I covered him, and I totally get it, having just been in his aura, so to speak. He's a really unique, high-energy, awesome guy. But I always tell this story. Like, I have never – sitting here in D.C. is just a nothing. I've never really had a coach reach out to me about another coach. And when Washington was interviewing coaches and landed on Dan Quinn last time, Sean McVay reached out to me and was like, dude, Raheem, man, he's the guy. Like, and I only say this to say that he is beloved by some of the best coaches in this sport. So, like, what is it about Raheem and the disconnect between maybe how everyone who's around him feels versus, that would be a little tougher to sell to people, I think, that don't know him.
Dude, I mean, talk about a guy who can build connections with people, like anybody, right? Like I remember he was a receiver coach when I was down in Atlanta, right? And he's got Julio Jones, Mohamed Sanu, Calvin Ridley, like big personalities. And you would have thought like he was the Pied Piper, man. Like, and again, Julio drives some of that, but like his football IQ is off the charts. Like to have a guy who's coordinated defense at the NFL level, but has also been a pseudo offensive coordinator at times, pass game coordinator. Like the amount of information and the teaching that guy can do is unparalleled. So like, I think Dan could be like, hey man, I want to run X. And there's no doubt in my mind that Raheem could take what Dan wanted, install it the way that Dan wants it, but also add enough flavor to it to make it his own thing, right? Because he just knows so much ball. I think about, like, I'm glad you mentioned the time in LA, right, with the Rams. Like what he was doing there was the same thing Gannon was doing. And I don't think there was any crossover with Gannon. He just studied, looked at what they were doing, made installation decisions, and kind of had the Staley tree element there too, and kind of made that thing work. So I think again he's just a bright dude who I don't think he can do anything. Like there's nothing he can't do from a coaching standpoint, and it makes me bummed because I feel like he's running into some tough situations from like as a head coach, but as a defensive coordinator, as a person you want in your building. Like talk about a person who could help a young David Blau, like with offensive stuff while installing a defense like that. To me, that's really appetizing. And again, it just speaks to so I got cut in Atlanta. This is another thing I love about him is he really cares about, in the same way Dan cares about the person, Raheem cares about the person. I got cut. Nobody called me. He called me as I was driving to the airport and was like, hey man, really sorry. And that was all. It was just, hey man, I'm going to miss you. Like that's big time stuff.
Was that when he was the wide receivers coach?
Yeah. And so, I mean, just like I wasn't seeing him every day, but that's big time. And that means something, obviously, to me, right? So, love Raheem, think he would be a great fit here. And again, to the crux of the question, he is just he creates good relationships. He's a good teacher. He's smart as heck. Like, I want that dude in the building. Like, that's really what it comes down to.
Logan Paulsen, Grant Paulsen, take command. All right, next, I want to ask you about your event that you're covering this week, the Shrine Bowl, and we'll get into a couple of questions we got to get answers to before we get out of here. Take command, Logan Paulsen and Grant Paulsen. So, Logan, tell me about the Shrine Bowl.
Shrine Bowl, man, it's one of these events where I think a lot of fans are like, oh, it's kind of the lesser bowl, so to speak. But I think for the Commanders this year, it's going to be especially important. And the reason I say that is because the Commanders are not picking very high. Obviously, they have the 7th pick overall. They have the 3rd pick, but they have basically a 5th, a 6th, a 6th, and a 7th. So kind of in that bottom half of the draft, like 4 picks. And I do think that when you look at the Shrine Bowl, you're looking at more of those types of players, kind of bottom half of the draft players, guys who are going to fill out your roster. And if you handle this event well, if you do, I mean, I genuinely believe this, you can find an upside pass rusher. You can find a pass catching 3rd down back. You can find a tight end with some pass game upside who can work in line. Like you can find, like there's some offensive linemen there that I think could be difference makers again. And these prospects are different than the Senior Bowl prospects who are more scheme agnostic. They're a little bit more talented. These guys are fits, right? And so when you look at Bill Krosky-Merritt, he was the right fit for Washington. And I think if you do your bargain bin shopping here and find guys that fit your culture, fit your identity, I think this is a great event for the Washington Commanders.
Some of the names that I saw that were included that people may recognize: quarterback Cade Klubnik from Clemson is taking part in this game. Damon Claiborne, the running back from Wake Forest, who's explosive. There's some talented wide receivers, including Skylar Bell from UConn. And then locally, people that follow football, Navy in Annapolis has this like Swiss Army knife running back receiver, talented guy who catches the football, could be a pass catching back in the next level. Eli Heidenreich, who's going to be playing in this game as well. So I always enjoy this. I always DVR it and kind of watch, as many of these Senior Bowl, Shrine Game, anything you can get your hands on, because it's just a good opportunity. And honestly, I like it for after the draft, when you see who the Commanders take and you see someone played, to go back, because like right now it doesn't mean as much to me. But you're like, oh, okay, there's their guy making a play. Yeah. But any of those names stick out to you or interest you?
I mean, Eli Heidenreich is one that I find to be really compelling. And I said this on our Road to the Draft show, which we do for the Commanders. And basically, like he plays receiver, kind of this wing back in the triple option. So like a running back receiver hybrid. And he is a very good route runner. He's not super fast. He's not super twitchy, but like he understands stems and how to break leverage and a little double stick at the top. And I think about the way that Kyle Shanahan uses a guy like Christian McCaffrey, who could play receiver in the NFL. And I think about the matchups you're able to draw. Like one of the things I loved about Austin is like he was a great third down back, right? He was in the backfield. He could pick up a blitz. He could run a screen. But like if you put him on the perimeter, like I don't know if he could win a one-on-one with a linebacker, for example, or a safety. Eli Heidenreich, if he can show that he can play running back at the NFL level, so blitz pickup, running downhill and the money looks, all that kind of thing. The idea of him being like us being in 12 personnel here in Washington with Bates and sitting on the field or whatever that looks like, and then being able to get into empty and get him on a matchup with a bad coverage player is something that I think that skill set, if again, this is why the bowl games are important. If he can do it at the level I think he can do it, I think would be a really compelling piece here in Washington.
All right, before we say goodbye, catch your interception.
Okay. Catch or interception?
Yeah, Buffalo Bills goes to the ground.
Oh, my God.
Catch or interception?
Dude, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Apparently, I don't know the rule. I thought that was simultaneous possession. I thought it was simultaneous possession, and that would go to the receiver. But then on all the talking heads this morning, oh, no, it's not simultaneous possession anymore. It's, completion through the ground, whatever the heck the rule was. So in the moment, I was like, it should have been a catch. But apparently I didn't know the rule well enough. So
by definition, I'm okay with people saying that is an interception because you have to complete it all the way through or whatever. Like by the letter of the law, that might be the case. I have such a problem with that. Like it's survive the ground, not survive the guy jumping on top of you, stealing the ball while you survive the ground. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Also,
in no other time during the game can you be landed on, down by contact, and then have the ball ripped out. So the survival of the catch supersedes that. But there's a touchdown earlier in the game for the Broncos where a dude drops the ball running into a cameraman sliding out of the end zone. No problem. Nobody had an issue with that. Nobody's stopping the play. The inconsistency is wild, but is it probably technically true? Because here's the argument for the interception. If he is there's no defender there. He falls, and as he's rolling over, the ball pops out and just goes down the field. It's an incomplete pass, right?
Right.
And so by that definition, someone would say, all right, well, Brandon Cooks had the ball ripped out, and if it could come out and be incomplete, then it's got to be an interception.
Right.
My problem is you've been landed on, you've been touched down, and there's simultaneous possession at one point while you're fighting for the ball while you're on the ground. All of that needs to supersede the continuation of the play. Not why they lost, one of many, many, many plays that didn't go their way. And how about them blowing out Sean McDermott? Like, what a time, man. 10 coaches out of jobs this offseason. Multiple of them made the playoffs.
It is. I'm like that. That's the thing that I'm kind of like, all these, everyone's trying to make that last little push, catch or no, they're trying to make that last push for the Super Bowl. And a lot of times, like, I think they look back, at least I do, to justify these decisions. I look back to the Tony Dungy firing in Tampa Bay and where they brought in Gruden and they won the Super Bowl the next year, just like from just bringing in a change of perspective, change of voice. Problem is, like, sometimes it doesn't work. So you've got all these borderline play, Baltimore, Buffalo, you've got these teams that are very talented that are getting rid of longtime head coaches that are basically saying we're counting on whoever we bring in to take this roster that we've built to the next level. And and that's the other thing is I look at Buffalo specifically and I'm like, man, that roster is flawed. It's not as, like they don't have a number one playmaking wide receiver. It's all underneath. They don't have anybody that can stretch the field. And you bring in Brandon Cooks as the guy who can stretch the field like 3 weeks ago. So like, to me, it's like, why is the GM there being absolved of blame? And why are we firing the coach who's been very consistent? It's just an interesting time to see some of these decisions.
Well, what's curious to me is who's left that's out there that you really like as a significant upgrade or that's going to get you over the hump. I don't even have a problem with moving on from McDermott. You've had a lot of bites at the apple. If you're a defensive-minded head coach and your defense is terrible and you've got an MVP caliber quarterback and you can't win year after year, then what are you even doing here? I totally get that. But
Right.
where are you going? I mean, Harbaugh's already landed. Stefanski's already landed. Those were considered to be two of the best. Tomlin has suggested he doesn't want to coach this year. You'd have to trade draft pick compensation. Hafley's already landed. Salah's already landed. So you're
Where's
now
Hafley? Where did Hafley go? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Hafley's going to be with the Miami Dolphins.
Oh, wow.
I think he'll bring Sean Mannion over with him as his offensive coordinator, from what I'm hearing.
And then Salah, where's Salah at?
Salah's going to Tennessee to coach the Titans.
Wow. That's a good hire. Like that hire. Those are good hires right there, yeah.
Yeah. But the point, 40% of the hires have been made now. And so I'm not saying you're not going to get a good head coach. It seems to me like they might just keep it in-house, like go full Washington and blow out Kingsbury and then promote Blau. So maybe it's like Joe Brady. So there's some thought that maybe Dable is super tight with Allen, comes back. That would be the ultimate failing up, by the way. If you go to New York and struggle with the Giants, get fired, go back and coach Josh Allen.
I'm back, baby. I'm back.
Would be wild, man. All right, well, Logan, it was fun as always. We're back later in the week with updates on everything going on with the Commanders. Enjoy your travel this week.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
For Logan, I'm Grant saying so long. Thanks to our producer, Evan. Multiple episodes every single week all offseason, breaking down all the news as it happens for the Commanders. So spread the word about Take Command, and thanks for listening.